December 18th, 1994. A 27-year-old woman is abducted, raped, stabbed over 30 times, and left for dead. Her throat is slashed so deeply, her head hangs by a thread. Yet, she survives. This is the story of Alison Botha, a woman whose will to live defied the impossible. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. Alison Botha was spending a quiet evening in Port Elizabeth. After dropping a friend at home, she returned to her flat. As she parked, Franz Dutoy forced her back into her car at knife point. They drove out of the city and picked up his friend, Tians Kruger. Alison quickly understood this was no robbery. They intended to kill her. Together, they drove her to a remote area outside Port Elizabeth in South Africa. They ordered her out of the car, and they subjected her to a brutal assault. One after the other, they raped her, repeatedly, over an extended period of time. Afterwards, they discussed killing her, calmly, as though it were routine. Kruger grabbed her from behind, pressing a hand over her mouth and nose, deliberately trying to silence her and cut off her air. Alison struggled. The pressure was overwhelming, and she briefly blacked out, but she gasped back to consciousness soon after. Enraged, the men threw her to the ground again. They began stabbing her more than 30 times. When Alison's body kept twitching, they decided to finish her. One of the men pulled her head back, took the knife, and slit her throat, 17 centimeters across, from ear to ear. The cut was so deep, it severed her windpipe and most of the muscles in her neck. Her head was left attached to her body by only the spinal cord and a thin layer of tissue. They struck her further, stabbing and pounding her body, leaving her intestines exposed through the torn abdomen. Each movement caused unbearable agony. Satisfied, they dragged her deeper into the bushes and left her to die. But Alison wasn't gone. Somehow, her mind refused to shut down. She felt sharp, searing pain in her abdomen, each wound tearing muscle and skin, leaving her organs exposed. Blood flowed freely. She could barely breathe. Her body was battered, but her mind remained alert. One thought crystallized in, "I will not die here." Alison lay in the coarse sand, her body broken and bleeding, abandoned by the men who thought her dead. The night was still, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic, which she instinctively latched onto as a faint guide. Then came the rasp of her own breath, a sickening, sucking sound from the open wound in her throat. It pulsed with blood. She tried to lift herself, but her vision suddenly tilted upward. Instead of the ground, she was staring at the stars above her. That's when she realized the horrifying truth. Her head had fallen backwards because her neck had been cut so deeply it could no longer hold. Panic rose for a moment, but then determination took over. She reached up and felt the gash. She understood. If she wanted to move, she would have to hold her head upright with her own hand. Then she looked down. In the faint moonlight, she saw her dirty intestines lying outside her body on the ground. With an eerie calm, she thought, they belong inside, not outside. And with both hands, she carefully pushed them back into the cavity of her stomach. The texture was shocking, warm and soft, slipping through her fingers. She pressed them back inside as best she could, using one hand to hold them in place, bracing the fragile, wounded body that remained. So, using one hand to stabilize her head and the other to press her abdomen, Alison began to crawl inch by inch toward the faint sound of traffic. Each movement sent waves of unbearable pain through her chest, her abdomen, and her neck. She collapsed again and again, face pressed into the sand. At one point, she thought of giving up, but then she pictured her mother, and she thought, if I die here, my mother will never know what happened to me. I can't let that happen. That thought carried her forward. Minutes stretched endlessly. She clawed her way out of the bushes. At last, she reached the edge of the road, but by lying flat, she realized no one would see her. So, with superhuman strength, Alison stood up. Her throat gaped open, every breath a wet rasp through the severed windpipe. Her body swayed, but she staggered into the road and into the path of headlights. The headlights belonged to a young man, 20-year-old veterinary student, Tian Eilert, who had been driving along the quiet road. At first, he thought the figure in the glare was a motionless animal, but as he slowed, horror struck him. A woman, barely conscious, her body bloodied and mangled. Tian jumped out of his car and ran toward her. Alison had collapsed again, her legs buckling beneath her, blood pooling on the asphalt, intestines still pressed into her abdomen by her trembling hands. He wrapped a blanket around her as best he could, shielding her from the cold night air and trying to stop her from going into shock. He kept talking to her, gently urging her to keep her bloodshot eyes open, to stay awake, to focus on breathing, simple instructions that anchored her mind in the fight to survive. Thankfully, he had a cell phone. He quickly called for an ambulance, giving the dispatcher full details of her condition and precise location. From the moment he found Alison until the ambulance arrived, they waited approximately 40 minutes, a tense and excruciating period during which he never left her side. He supported her torso, kept her head upright, and maintained pressure on her exposed abdomen to prevent her organs from slipping further. Every movement caused Alison unbearable pain, but Tian's calm, steady presence became her lifeline. He continued to speak to her, softly encouraging small movements, reminding her to breathe and helping her focus on survival despite the gaping wound in her throat. When the ambulance finally arrived, paramedics took over, carefully moving her onto a stretcher and securing her for transport. Tian relayed every detail of her injuries, ensuring the medical team understood the severity of her condition. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Alison felt, for the first time since the attack, that she was no longer completely alone. She had survived the wilderness of pain, guided by sheer willpower and the courage of a stranger who refused to let her die. The ambulance doors slammed shut behind Alison, and the world became a blur of sirens, cold metal, and the rhythmic pulse of wheels on asphalt. Every jolt sent fire through her abdomen, every breath a wet rasp from her severed windpipe. Yet through the haze of pain, a thread of consciousness clung to life. She was alive. She had survived the impossible. In the emergency room, harsh lights cut through the fog in her mind. Nurses and doctors swarmed with quiet urgency. The doctor assessed her with surgical calm, issuing instructions that snapped the team into action. One nurse held her head steady, while another applied sterile cloths to the gaping wound. Her mother, Anna, arrived in a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. Alison, barely able to nod, clung to the sound of her voice, focusing on the warmth of her mother's presence. The surgeries were grueling. The team closed the abdominal wound after carefully scrubbing her intestines, cleaning all the dust, sticks, and rocks stuck to it, then repositioning the organs Alison had held in place herself. Then came the repair to her neck, the severed windpipe and torn muscles painstakingly reconstructed. The doctor's hands were steady, but Alison could feel the tension, the silent understanding that her survival hung by threads. For days, she remained in the ICU, tethered to machines monitoring every heartbeat and breath. Her mother never left her side, whispering stories of normal life, grounding Alison in the possibility of tomorrow. And Alison, though broken, began to respond. A squeeze of a hand, a blink, a rasped acknowledgement. Each gesture was a victory, a defiance of the night that had tried to claim her. The day after the attack, police came to the hospital, where she was able to not only point to the images of her attackers, but write their names down. The chief prosecutor needed more to strengthen the case. He needed her to actually speak their names. It may seem unreasonable, but it would be easy to see how the defense could accuse anyone of writing names on paper. She was determined, so the doctor removed the tubes and she could utter their names. Thanks to her testimony, police quickly arrested Dutoy and Kruger. They were shocked, neither had expected her to make it, but they showed no remorse. Alison faced Franz and Tians in court. Her voice, steady despite the memories clawing at her, recounted the horrors of that night. The courtroom was silent, captivated by her courage. Every word she spoke painted a chilling picture, leaving no doubt of the terror she had endured. Their trial exposed the horror of what they had done, and in a rare move at the time, both were sentenced to life in prison. Alison's courage in the courtroom was as remarkable as her survival. Not only had she endured the unthinkable, she had ensured justice would follow. In the years that followed, Alison turned her pain into purpose. She became a beacon for survivors, sharing her story to inspire strength, hope, and resilience. Through her advocacy, she helped others find their voices and reclaim their lives. She wrote a book, I Have Life, sharing her journey of survival. Instead of letting trauma define her, Alison built a life filled with purpose. Amazingly, she also became a mother, a role she has described as her greatest victory. Today, Alison continues to live quietly, though her story remains widely known. Franz Dutoy and Tians Kruger were initially released on parole in 2023, a decision that shocked the public and left Alison feeling unsettled. She was not consulted prior to their release, and her legal team immediately challenged it. During this period, Franz Dutoy also made headlines for an audacious legal move. He attempted to claim a share of the financial proceeds from Alison's memoir. His argument, that the book was partially based on his life, was widely condemned. The court ultimately dismissed his claim, affirming that Alison alone had the right to tell her story and control the narrative of her survival. As of February 2025, the two perpetrators are back in prison. Their parole, granted in July 2023, was revoked by the Minister of Correctional Services on February 4, 2025, following legal challenges and public outcry. The revocation was based on concerns about community safety and the failure to consult the victim, Alison Botha, during the parole process. Both men were reincarcerated and will remain in custody. Alison expressed relief upon hearing the news, stating she could breathe again. This was Phantom Frontiers. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please drop a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And like and subscribe for more true stories from the edge of the unknown. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind even more so.